It has been alleged that the parents of the aforementioned individual fabricated a medical emergency in order to steal a sum of $155. The couple used the $155 to fund the honeymoon of their eldest child, which they had planned to be a lavish affair. The couple married in secret, which resulted in their bankruptcy. The author of this text married her husband at the age of 26, 6 months after their relationship began. Despite the year-long relationship, the couple opted for an intimate ceremony at the farmhouse property of the bride's aunt. This was not the initial plan, as the couple had initially envisioned a beach wedding, as the location holds significant sentimental value. The couple's affinity for the beach, a place they visit at least once a month to relax and unwind, made it a particularly meaningful choice. I have even begun investigating potential lodging options for our wedding party, as I would for any other bride. I desired a memorable wedding, and I had been saving for a significant celebration for the past 5 years. I work in advertising, and I earn a respectable income. However, my husband and I had previously lived modestly and had been saving for the future. To secure one of the most prestigious hotels with a sea-facing view, so that our guests could truly enjoy an exceptional experience. It was intended to be a luxurious affair, but we were forced to alter our plans and reduce the scale considerably due to my parents' decision to borrow money from me a few months ago. I was reluctant to decline their request, given that my brother's wedding was also scheduled to take place a few months later. My brother's wedding occurred a few months ago, but it was a rather impromptu affair. He and his wife had been together for approximately 2 years and had proposed to each other just a month before the wedding. The ceremony was relatively small, with only immediate family and a few friends in attendance. I was pleased for him and his wife since it was their wedding day, a day of their choosing. However, a few weeks after the wedding, my mother reached out to me and asked to borrow $115. She informed me that my father had fallen ill suddenly and that it was likely his diabetes was acting up again. However, she was unable to bear the medical expenses alone and requested my assistance. She explained that the doctors had suggested a special drug, but that it was expensive due to importation costs. Unfortunately, their insurance did not cover this expense. I was concerned about my father's health, so I decided to provide her with the necessary funds. I inquired about the medical reports on several occasions, requesting them from my mother. However, she consistently avoided answering these questions when I visited. My father was frequently bedridden, yet he did not appear to be gravely ill. When I inquired about his hospitalization, my mother stated that it was unnecessary at the time. Nevertheless, he was administered an uncommon drug, which the facility in question did not produce the desired result, and the insurance company did not cover the cost. After the initial few visits, I had determined that something was amiss with my parents. However, I was reluctant to accuse them of anything until I was certain that it would be disadvantageous for me to accuse them of lying about a medical emergency to obtain money. It subsequently transpired that my brother had not been visiting our parents, and even when I inquired about his whereabouts, they were unable to provide an explanation. My father's absence was a source of concern to me, despite reassurances from my parents that he was simply too young to worry about. They encouraged me to focus on my studies and work, yet they were comfortable with my anxiety. After a couple of weeks, I spoke with my brother about the situation. He informed me that he would visit our father as soon as he returned from his honeymoon. I was unaware that he had already left for his honeymoon because my parents had not informed me. He informed me that neither he nor his wife had posted about this on their social media, so I was unaware of his whereabouts when I inquired about his absence. He stated that he had been planning to surprise everyone by returning after a month of being Mia with a collection of photographs, stories, and memories from their trip around Europe. He further explained that he had no intention of informing me, but he had been concerned when I mentioned that our father was unwell. This prompted him to reply to me. He proceeded to tell me that he had spoken to our parents after receiving my alarming text, but they had reassured him that there was no cause for concern. They informed him that they were doing well. He added that our parents had probably exaggerated the situation when talking to him, which had led to a misunderstanding. He attempted to give our parents the benefit of the doubt by assuming that they had been hiding the truth from his brother because they were concerned about his well-being. He informed me that he had spoken to our parents after he received my alarming text message. However, they had reassured him that there was no cause for concern and that they were doing just fine. He explained that our parents had probably exaggerated the situation when talking to me, and I had believed them because I was somewhat neurotic, which had led to a misunderstanding. I attempted to give my parents the benefit of the doubt by forcing myself to believe that they may have been concealing the truth from my brother because they did not want to cause him distress. I was aware of the circumstances surrounding my parents' house and was therefore able to provide an accurate account of what I had seen. However, my brother's subsequent observation that I would have felt guilty about not being present for my father if the information I had provided about his deteriorating health was indeed accurate prompted me to consider the potential implications of my actions. I therefore sought to ascertain the financial implications of the proposed honeymoon. The total cost of the trip was estimated to be approximately $125,000, which was to be borne by the parents of the groom-to-be. This figure was based on the assumption that the couple would be staying in the most expensive hotels and dining at the best restaurants, as well as shopping for numerous items. It was also assumed that the groom-to-be and his wife would be covering the cost of their own travel and accommodation. Upon learning of the financial implications of the trip, I immediately recognized that the majority of the funds would be allocated towards the wedding. I was reassured that there was no medical emergency that would require such a significant expenditure. There had been no emergency requiring documentation, and thus, there were no records to present. My parents had simply invented the story to obtain money for my brother's honeymoon, which they intended to use as a wedding gift. I felt betrayed upon hearing my brother boast about how our parents were going above and beyond to provide for him and his wife. They had not been able to have a grand wedding, so they were enjoying their honeymoon. The money that I had, the funds that had been borrowed from my parents, were from my wedding fund. Upon realizing that my parents had given it all away to my brother, I felt as though I had been betrayed. My parents informed me that they had to devise a story because they knew that I would not provide them with the money if I knew that it was going to be used for my brother's honeymoon. They explained that he had been experiencing difficulties at work and had been in a depressed state for an extended period. Therefore, they wanted to provide him with some financial assistance. It is possible to have fun without having to worry about money. Unfortunately, they were unable to fund the project themselves because doing so would have endangered their own retirement fund. Consequently, they had to borrow money from me. Their reasoning was that I was still young and earning, and that I would have many years ahead of me during which I could work and earn this money back. However, this was not the same for them. They also said that it was just money, and that they would return it at some point. For the time being, I was instructed to put myself second and to think about my brother's feelings. Given that this honeymoon had apparently rejuvenated him and rescued him from getting depressed, I was incredulous. This meant that I would have to reduce my wedding expenses for no reason. I had been amenable to the idea of a smaller wedding as long as it did not compromise my father's health. However, this was not something that I had consented to. I was enraged once they informed me of the truth. I demanded that they repay me before the wedding, as I wished to use the financial resources required for a beach wedding were considerable. While my husband and his family were contributing to the costs, I was responsible for my own expenses. My parents had initially indicated that they would pay for my wedding, but they subsequently informed me that they could only afford to pay for one of the two events. I had already decided to pursue higher education and would therefore be responsible for financing my wedding. I had been saving up for my wedding on my own, as I had been the primary financial supporter of the event. When my brother began college, I inquired of him whether my parents had required him to choose between these two options. He responded with derision, suggesting that this was an absurd notion. I did not bring this topic up with my parents because I did not want to accuse them of favoritism, despite the clear evidence that they had a favorite. I was young and still needed their assistance because I had not yet secured employment. It was evident that initiating a discussion on this matter would only exacerbate the situation. It was therefore deemed inappropriate to confront my parents about this issue. However, it did resurface several years later when I raised the topic of the financial support they had provided to my brother and their apparent preference for him over me. My parents initially denied this, but the evidence was overwhelming. I informed them that I would not compromise my dream wedding due to my brother's professional challenges. I could have provided him with financial support by sending him on an expensive vacation with their own money. However, I had invested significant effort over 5 years to save for my wedding, and it was unfair for them to redirect that money to my brother. They informed me that they were unable to return the funds and that it would take several years for them to do so. The wedding and the subsequent repayment of the funds to me would take a couple of years. It was expected that I would be okay with this, as the family was considered to be of paramount importance. If I was willing to spend the money on a medical emergency for my father, there was no reason why I could not spend it on myself. The aforementioned funds were allocated to forestall my brother's descent into depression. It bears noting, however, that my brother was never destined to experience this affliction due to his lack of commitment to his profession. This lack of dedication was the primary factor contributing to his underperformance and meager remuneration. His role in sales, which is predominantly commission-based, further exacerbated this issue. If he is unable to succeed in his chosen field, he must accept responsibility for his own shortcomings. While he may have been disconcerted by this reality, I can assure you that he was never destined to experience depression. He simply lacked the motivation to care about anything beyond his immediate circumstances, having been indulged by my parents throughout his life. He was motivated to work hard for material possessions, which is why he seemed upset about his job. However, my parents exaggerated the situation to make it seem like he was actually bothered by his failures at work and that he needed to be rescued. This was a fabrication, and I attempted to convey this to my parents. It was of great importance to me that I fulfill my financial obligations to my husband's family. I had already made a commitment to them that I would cover certain expenses, which would become impossible if I did not have the money. They needed to find a solution, but they informed me that there was no way that they could return the money to me before I got married. I was forced to consider scaling down my expectations or requesting assistance from my husband and his family. Eventually, I resorted to pleading with them to return my money, but they merely shook their heads and reiterated that they would eventually do so, but not before the wedding. It was not feasible. I departed their domicile in tears, and upon my return home, I informed my husband of the situation. He was similarly displeased and more distressed than I was. He was contemplating contacting a lawyer, but I advised against it, citing the lack of written proof that my mother had intended to use the funds for medical reasons. Furthermore, there was no evidence that she had ever expressed a desire to return the money to me. The transactions were entirely informal, and there were no binding contracts or documents to substantiate her intentions. Even if we were to file a lawsuit against her, it would be unlikely to yield any tangible results. The legal costs would likely exceed the value of the money in question. We lacked tangible evidence, as our communications had been entirely verbal and off the record. Despite our desire to pursue legal action against my parents, we ultimately decided against it, recognizing the futility of such a pursuit and the potential for further financial waste in a futile endeavor. Instead, we began to consider alternative options. We began to consider alternative wedding plans. Fortunately, my husband's family offered assistance after learning of the actions taken by my parents. His aunt proposed that we utilize her farmhouse venue at no cost. We had initially expressed interest in a beach wedding, and this venue aligned with our vision. The aunt had not initially proposed this venue, however, upon our exploration of alternative locations, she did so. My husband had previously viewed the venue, but upon my initial visit, I was immediately convinced that this was the ideal location. It was a stunning setting, and although it was not situated directly on the beach, the proximity to the water was a significant advantage. My husband and I were content with the venue's proximity to the beach. His aunt was allowing us to use the venue at no cost, which further justified our decision to plan the wedding at the farmhouse. I became increasingly involved in wedding planning, which provided an additional reason to distance myself from my parents. I had already decided that they would not be invited to the wedding. I had considered that they would not be invited to my wedding. However, I was uncertain about my brother, as he had not done anything wrong. He was unaware that my parents had borrowed the money for me to give it to him. However, he made the decision much easier for me by calling me once he was back. From his honeymoon, he informed me that he had been informed by our mother of the circumstances surrounding the loan. He expressed his displeasure at my reluctance to return the money, suggesting that the situation was not as significant as I had made it out to be. Despite this, he remained unconvinced that I should be held to account for the loan. The individual who expended my funds and asserted that he would promptly repay them once he was able did not fulfill this promise. Consequently, I was compelled to endure the ordeal of the wedding and reduce my expectations. This experience led me to form an opinion of him as well. After that, I ceased communication with both parties. Now that I lacked the entirety of my wedding fund, I was unable to spend money without due consideration and had a lavish, ostentatious wedding. I believe this approach was beneficial because the wedding that I did have was aesthetically more impressive than what I had initially envisioned. We had to reduce the scale of the event, but it was ultimately worthwhile because, over time, we realized that this day was intended to be about us and our relationship. In our everyday lives, we were not the kind of people we were trying to portray ourselves as. It would be a rather superficial decision to spend a significant amount of money on a lavish wedding just to impress others. We decided that we would reduce the cost of the wedding and instead do something more meaningful. With the funds that we had accumulated subsequently, I am grateful for the manner in which the events unfolded, as my wedding was still aesthetically pleasing and romantic, yet lacked the ostentation that I had initially envisioned. This was a fortunate turn of events, as we were surrounded by only those whom we loved. And who loved us to celebrate our coming together. This seems to be the essence of a wedding. I am pleased with the outcome and have recently shared images of my wedding on social media. All members of my family who were invited to the wedding were given specific instructions. In order to prevent my parents and brother from learning that the invitations had already been sent, I instructed my wedding planner to withhold this information. This allowed us to have a private ceremony without their presence or attempts to pressure me into extending an invitation. The wedding ceremony had concluded without incident, and I had no reason to believe that posting the photographs on social media would be problematic. However, I was contacted by the individuals in question the following day, demanding an explanation as to why they had not been invited to the wedding. I considered their actions to be somewhat surprising. It was somewhat surprising that they even expected to be invited, given that the last conversation I had with any of them had not been a particularly pleasant one. I had been crying when I left my parents' house after our last argument, and we had not spoken to each other since. The last time I spoke to my brother, he made me feel like this. I was the one who was at fault, and I was the one who was being dramatic. After that, I had not spoken to any of them and they had not tried to talk to me either. Therefore, I was unaware of why they had even expected to be invited. Not only had they expected that I was going to invite them, but they were upset that they were not present at the wedding. My parents called me to inform me of the wedding, and then added my brother to the phone call so that they could yell at me at once. I was not concerned about this and found it to be an entitled act. I had already cut them out of my life and did not require this drama while I was trying to enjoy my life. As a newlywed, I informed them that I had had to reduce the cost of the wedding due to the theft of funds from me. I therefore decided to invite only family and a few close friends. As they were neither of these, they were not included on the list. I then terminated the call and blocked them, hoping that they would cease contacting me. However, an hour after that phone call, my husband informed me that my brother had reached out to him to inform us that my parents had been offended by my remarks. My mother was visibly distressed, sobbing and nearly fainting due to the intensity of her emotional response. My husband relayed this information, but I began to feel uneasy. I am experiencing feelings of guilt because I did not intend to cause my parents such distress. I am uncertain whether my brother's claims are genuine or a fabrication. His actions have left me with a sense of unease. Furthermore, I am disconcerted by my brother's decision to withhold information about my parents' involvement in the wedding. It has been a week since I last spoke with my parents and brother. In the wake of my recent conversation with my parents and my brother, I have resolved to refrain from further communication with them. While my mother may continue to express her distress, I am convinced that this will not alter the facts of the matter. On the day of our confrontation, I had been crying profusely, and I had even pleaded with them to return the money. I informed them of this before the wedding, but they did not seem to care. They had treated this matter very lightly, so I was going to do the same to them. As a result, they would have to face the consequences of their actions. I also informed my brother that he should refrain from contacting me or my husband, especially my husband, because he was not involved in this situation. I did not want my family to engage in their trivial disputes and, subsequently, blocked my brother's communication. I was no longer willing to tolerate their actions. They had treated me poorly throughout my life, but I was determined to put an end to it. If I had the option, I would even pursue legal action against them. One potential avenue for recourse is to pursue a claim for restitution. However, the lack of concrete evidence may present a challenge in this regard. My husband has expressed interest in exploring this possibility further. He has engaged in discussions with a lawyer with a reputation for handling such cases. We are scheduled to meet with the lawyer in a couple of days. In order to make a decision about what to do until then, it is necessary to consider ways of making them confess or admit that they had borrowed the money from me under the pretext of using it for a medical emergency, but then had given it away to my brother so that he could have fun. Proving the matter in court will undoubtedly be challenging, but I am reluctant to let the matter rest so easily. I am entitled to restitution, and I am prepared to pursue all avenues to ensure that the funds are returned. To provide context, I informed my brother yesterday that I would not tolerate any further involvement in this matter. My brother was instructed by my husband not to involve him in our family drama. However, he proceeded to do so, despite the fact that it did not concern him. Upon our return from work, my husband informed me that my parents and my brother had sent him a number of messages, in which they demanded that he speak to me. Furthermore, he instructed me to unblock them when he had already blocked them. They then proceeded to take the matter to a higher level by actually showing up at his workplace. It is reported that they had been waiting for him right outside the building, and as soon as they saw his car leaving the premises, they began following him and honking at him repeatedly. He was forced to pull over and wait for them to catch up because he recognized my brother's car and knew that it was them. He also knew that if he did not stop and wait for them, they would simply follow him home, which would have caused significant distress to me. Consequently, he decided to take one for the team. My brother was approached by the individuals in question, who requested a private conversation. My husband, however, was eager to conclude the matter. They proceeded to a nearby diner, where my family was permitted to express their concerns. My brother informed them that he believed it was unfair for me to cut off communication over financial matters and that my reaction was disproportionate. They also expressed their belief that my assertion that we were no longer family was unwarranted, given that they had borrowed from us. The financial compensation offered to me was excessive. I had already terminated communication with them, so they were unable to contact me directly. However, they were aware that if my husband attempted to speak with me, I might consider listening to him. Therefore, they attempted to persuade him, and then my husband could remind me that we were a family, regardless of the circumstances. I needed to demonstrate this instead of reacting with temper tantrums to every minor misunderstanding and behaving like a child. My parents also informed me that they would eventually return the money to me, but it was not feasible for them to do so all at once. I had already explained the situation to my brother and parents numerous times, so I needed to be more thoughtful. My brother was struggling at work, and my parents were about to retire in a couple of years. They were trying to convince my husband that this was all my fault and that I was acting out for no reason. However, my husband played it really well. Instead of putting them in their place, he actually entertained their accusations and made them feel like he was on their side. He told them that he could try and explain this to me, but it would help a lot more if they reached out to me personally and sent a heartfelt message to me. Thus far, they had only been taking an accusatory tone with me. However, my husband convinced them that if they acknowledged their mistakes, then that might calm me down. Those individuals actually bought it. My husband manipulated them into sending me a message where they acknowledged what they had done. He made them believe that this might make me go easy on them and that I would end up apologizing to them because tone was everything. It's all a lot of baloney. Of course, because as soon as they sent that message, we are using that as an admission of guilt. After the legal proceedings were concluded, I am genuinely gratified by my husband's performance. He demonstrated a greater capacity to cope with the situation than I would have, and I consider him to be a cunning strategist. However, I am also aware that he is my cunning strategist and therefore, I hold him in high regard. Update 3, my husband's plan was successful, and we are currently experiencing a surge of positive emotions. My parents and my brother, a number of individuals, sent me an email in which they detailed every single falsehood they had told and confessed to whatever they had done. Having obtained proof, my husband has given our lawyer the green light to proceed with a petition, and we will shortly be receiving our money back. The sum of $115,000 has been misappropriated. While the sum of $1,000 may seem insignificant to many, it represents a significant amount of money to me. I have spent the past 5 years saving for the future, working hard to achieve my current position. It has required considerable effort, including late nights and personal sacrifices. I am not willing to let this investment be in vain simply because my brother has been less diligent. My parents are complicit in their son's actions, and we will be pursuing legal action against them. We are committed to recovering the funds that were misappropriated. Additionally, we have commenced planning for our honeymoon, which will be a brief excursion to the beach, a location that holds sentimental value due to its significance in this matter. The location is ideal for us. We may take a longer break in a couple of months and make an actual vacation out of it, but until then, this is the only option. We recognize that there is no need to impress others or spend a significant amount of money. We can simply do whatever makes us happy, and so we are doing exactly that. I do not wish to emulate my brother, who posted numerous photographs from his honeymoon once they had returned, seemingly for the purpose of ostentatious display. However, he is now facing legal action as a result. It is regrettable that they have reached this point, but they have brought this upon themselves and therefore deserve whatever consequences may ensue.